The Supreme Court of the United States has fortunately decided to protect America's system of checks and balances in a case involving Trump-backed election law theory. Now, the situation or the case itself centered on electoral maps in the state of North Carolina. Republican lawmakers in North Carolina were asking the justices to adopt a long-dormant legal theory and hold that states' courts and other state entities have a limited role in reviewing election rules established by state legislatures when it comes to federal elections. So let's pause for a second and kind of understand what that means. Republican lawmakers in the state of North Carolina did not want the courts to intervene if they were engaging in electoral behavior, drawing electoral maps, doing things that would be deemed unconstitutional, right? They wanted to do away with the system of checks and balances as it pertains to elections in the state of North Carolina. Well, North Carolina Supreme Court actually struck down the state's 2022 congressional map, citing it an illegal partisan gerrymander that overwhelmingly favored the Republican Party. The state's highest court then replaced that map with another map, congressional map that favored Democrats. Republican lawmakers were furious about it, and so they decided to challenge this all the way to the Supreme Court. And so the Supreme Court heard the case. And here's what we know, okay? They relied upon the elections clause of the Constitution that provides that rules governing the manner of holding elections for senators and representatives must be prescribed in each state by the legislature thereof. Under the Independent State Legislature theory, the lawmakers argued, the Republican lawmakers, state legislatures should be able to set rules with little to no interference from the state courts. But after the case was argued to the Supreme Court, there was a little bit of a mix-up, okay? So what ended up happening was the state Supreme Court was then replaced by conservative justices who decided to overturn the previous state's Supreme Court ruling. And luckily, since the United States Supreme Court had already heard oral arguments in this case, they decided, regardless of what the current state's Supreme Court has ruled, we are going to decide that what the Republican lawmakers are asking for here is unconstitutional. Chief Justice John Roberts wrote the majority opinion here, and I'm gonna give you their reasoning for their opinion in just a moment, but Cenk, I want you to jump in.
Yeah, guys, this is a giant case. This is like a mini Marbury versus Madison. So if you know any legal history, that was the most important case in Supreme Court history. And there's a little bit of that here. So it's super important on two grounds. Number one, if they had voted the other way, it could have quite literally ended our democracy.
Absolutely.
So number one, it would give the state legislatures the power to gerrymander to oblivion. So they could, they have already gerrymandered like crazy. They already have those dragon districts, etc., these absurdly shaped districts. But in this case, if there's no checks at all from the courts, they could just draw up any map they like. It doesn't matter how absurd it is. They could just 100% pick their own voters. That's point one. Point two, they could end all ballot measures questioning any part of elections. So the people themselves, even if they got frustrated at what the legislature is doing, could not overrule them. Not only could the ballot measures on gerrymandering not be able to pass, but what if there was a ballot measure saying that the politicians can't take bribes? Sorry, can't do it. It's related to elections. Only the state legislature can be involved there. But most importantly, this arose because of the fake elector scheme. So the Republicans had a plan that, hey, it doesn't matter that Trump lost. Instead of having the electors, the real electors, go to the electoral college, we'll have state legislatures, which are Republican, even in some blue states, and certainly in some swing states, we'll have them say, no, those electors are not going, Trump's electors are going. Well, the courts couldn't review it if they won in this case. And so they could literally wipe away our votes and just say, no, we don't care how you voted. We're gonna pick the Republican as president no matter what. So this was a monumental case. Now I'm gonna explain the Marbury v. Madison angle and how the courts protected themselves here. And we're gonna talk about how some of the conservative Supreme Court justices did the right thing. And that's like seriously shocking. But let's give you more details first.
So first, let's show you how the justices ruled in this case. As I mentioned, Chief Justice John Roberts wrote the 6-3 majority opinion. The dissenting justices included Thomas, Gorsuch, and Alito. And in his writing, Chief Justice John Roberts says that the state courts retain the authority to apply state constitutional restraints when legislatures act under the power conferred upon them by the Elections Clause. He also writes that when state legislatures act pursuant to their Elections Clause authority, they engage in lawmaking subject to the typical constraints on the exercise of such power. In sum, our precedents have long rejected the view that legislative actions under the Elections Clause is purely federal in character, governed only by restraints found in the federal Constitution. Further, the ruling noted that the court allowed that federal courts can have some role in supervising state courts in certain circumstances, with Roberts writing that state courts do not have free rein. Federal courts, Roberts said, must not abandon their duty to exercise judicial review. Cenk.
So that's what gets to basically the deal that Roberts is making here. So in Marbury v. Madison, basically the court decided to exchange their political advantage based on the political composition of the court at the time for the ability to say the Supreme Court is the ultimate arbiter of what is constitutional. And that's why it's the most important Supreme Court case. And then the politicians accepted that because it was to their advantage. In this case, they're doing something similar here. Most of the justices are Republican, and this would massively help Republicans. It would allow them to cheat on a grand scale. They're trading that in for more power for the courts, because now they're establishing this ruling. No, you cannot circumvent state courts. State courts decide what is constitutional and not constitutional in that state, and you cannot circumvent federal courts. Federal courts can still override the state courts and the state legislature. So they are accruing more power for themselves, but I think they are correct. I think they're correct legally, but don't get it twisted as to why they're doing it. But I'll take this victory any way that I can get it. And even so, I agree with their legal principles anyway, so it's a double win. So, and look, give credit where credit is due. Judge Roberts doing the right thing here, and it's a statesman-like ruling and exchange. Amy Coney Barrett doing the right thing. Brett Kavanaugh doing the right thing. But it also gives you a sense of how radical this proposal was. It was really like, and this is the cherry on top. So Alito and Gorsuch write an opinion. I'm sorry, not Alito, Thomas. Thomas writes the opinion, Gorsuch joins it, where they say, look, this case shouldn't even be decided. The lower courts reversed the ruling anyway. This case was already over. That's a normal legal argument, right? But they add on top, but we would have ruled the other way. Alito does not join that part of the opinion. Alito is maximum radical. He is as radical as Clarence Thomas, if not more so. And even he was like, I don't know that I would have ruled the other way. Like this kind of ends democracy. We can't do this. So we dodged an enormous bullet there, guys. So this is the most important news story of the day, even with the Trump audio tape and all of that out there. This is gigantic.
Does this give you a little bit of peace of mind when it comes to the future of our democratic process?
No, I'm not joking or exaggerating 1% when I say it gave me huge peace of mind. There was a couple of hurdles that we had to get past. One hurdle was this, because if you have this, at any moment in the future, they could steal any election, right? And it's not like they haven't shown a proclivity to do that. They tried to do it in the last election, and spectacularly so, right? The second bullet is Trump himself. Trump / Tucker Carlson, anyone who's willing to say, I don't care, I'm staying even if I lose, right?
Yeah.
So I don't think DeSantis would do that. I know others disagree. I don't think any of the other Republicans would do that. I hate their policies, but I don't think that they're crazy enough and demagogic enough to say, no, I'm ripping up the Constitution. It's basically a coup and there's no more democracy. Trump would definitely do that. He already tried to do that. And there's a couple of others like Bannon, et cetera, that are in that category, but not that many. So once we get past Trump, that's the second hurdle. Then the corporate guys, whether it's DeSantis on the right or Biden on the left, we'll beat those guys. That's just a matter of demographics. Young voters will come in and we'll win. Because we clear those two obstacles in this election, and even though it looks like we're in a bad spot, no, we're actually almost home free after that. Thanks for watching The Young Turks, really appreciate it. Another way to show support is through YouTube memberships. You'll get to interact with us more. There's live chat emojis, badges. You've got emojis of me, Anna, John, JR, so those are super fun. But you also get playback of our exclusive member-only shows and specials right after they air. So all of that, all you gotta do is click that join button right underneath the video. Thank you.